Under the gray skies of the outer colony, Captain Elias walked through the rusted gates of the shelter of forgotten beings, a place most humans avoided, where children who were not quite human waited for someone brave enough to give them a home, and the air inside carried a heaviness that pressed against his chest as he moved past rows of small figures with strange eyes, scaled skin, or delicate wings, all silent, all waiting, but none drew his attention as sharply as the girl sitting, alone in the corner, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her silver eyes staring at the floor as though she had already given up on the world. The caretaker whispered that she had been there the longest, that no one wanted her because she did not speak much, and because strange things seemed to happen around her, lights flickering, doors opening, machines shutting down without reason. And while others called her cursed, Elias felt only a pull deep inside him, a recognition he could not explain, and he knelt down before her, speaking gently though she did not reply. And in that moment he noticed the faint shimmer in her eyes, not just sadness but something buried far deeper, something waiting to be seen. Against the warnings of the caretaker and the doubtful looks of the other visitors, Elias signed the adoption papers, his signature firm as though he already knew that his choice would set him on a path from which there would be no return. And when the girl was brought to him with only a worn blanket around her shoulders, she did not cry, did not speak, but simply looked at him with an expression that carried both fear and a strange kind of hope. And as he led her out into the cold streets, past the metal walls and flickering neon signs of the colony, he realized that every step he took with her felt heavier, as though unseen eyes were watching, as though fate itself had just taken notice of what he had done. And though he could not explain it, Elias felt the shelter behind him fading into a memory, while before him stretched a future filled with questions he had no answers for. And as the door of his freighter closed behind them and the engines roared to life, he looked once more at the quiet child sitting across from him, silver, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, and wondered what story she carried inside her silence. What storm might follow them now that he had chosen to rescue the loneliest alien girl in the shelter. Elias guided the girl, whom he now called Lyra, into his freighter, a ship old but sturdy, its walls lined with memories of years spent traveling across star systems. Yet now the corridors felt different with her presence, as if every shadow stretched deeper and every sound carried a hidden meaning. And while she sat quietly in the co-pilot's chair, her silver eyes reflected the lights of the control panel with an intensity that unsettled him, for she never asked questions, never spoke unless he gently encouraged her. Yet she observed everything as though she was measuring the ship, the stars, and even him. And at night when the engines hummed and Elias tried to sleep, he sometimes woke to find the lights flickering softly as if responding to her unspoken emotions, the temperature dropping suddenly before rising again, or the faint echo of metallic whispers in the ventilation ducts, though he knew no one else was aboard. And though logic told him it was coincidence, something in his gut whispered that it was her doing. Once, when he showed her the navigation console, her hand brushed the screen, and the entire map shifted and zoomed into regions he had never programmed, strange routes lighting up like veins of light across the galaxy. And she pulled her hand away quickly as if she had been caught in a secret, her eyes avoiding his. And Elias felt both awe and unease, because a child who could command a starship without training was no ordinary orphan. And as he watched her slowly eat the warm meal he prepared, each bite cautious as though she had not been fed properly for years, he wondered what life she had known before the shelter, what shadows clung to her silence, and why the caretaker had seemed so eager to push her aside. Yet the more time he spent with her, the more protective he felt, a bond forming between them that was deeper than he expected. But in the quiet corners of his mind a question kept burning: if this child held such strange powers, who else knew about her? And what would they do if they learned she was no longer hidden away in the forgotten shelter? The thought lingered heavy as the ship drifted into hyperspace, and as Lyra finally looked at him with the faintest trace of a smile, he realized that whatever mystery surrounded her was only beginning to unfold, and it would not be long before someone, somewhere, came searching for the girl he had taken under his care. Days turned into weeks as Elias traveled from colony to colony, carrying goods and supplies on his freighter. And with each passing day, Lyra seemed less like the silent figure from the shelter and more like a mystery wrapped in fragile trust. For though she rarely spoke, she followed him everywhere, her silver eyes always searching, always watching, and sometimes when she thought he was not looking, she touched the walls of the ship with her small hands as though she could feel its heartbeat, and the panels beneath her fingers would hum faintly or flicker with a glow that vanished the moment she pulled away, leaving Elias to wonder if the ship itself was responding to her presence. One evening, while they were docked at a trade station, Elias left her in the cabin to collect supplies. But when he returned, he found her standing near the viewport, her eyes glowing faintly as she stared into the endless darkness of space. And in that moment, every light on the ship pulsed once in unison like a living creature, making his breath catch in his throat, for it was no trick of the eye but something undeniable, something powerful moving through her. And though she turned away quickly, he caught the fear in her expression, as if she wished to hide what she was. Later that night, pirates raided the station, alarms blaring as ships docked and armed figures stormed the cargo bays, and Elias, grabbing his old blaster, tried to shield Lyra as they hurried back to the freighter. But when 3 raiders cut them off in the corridor, snarling demands and raising their weapons, something impossible happened. Lyra stepped forward, her face pale but her eyes burning silver, and the air itself grew heavy as the raiders' rifles shook in their hands, before snapping apart in showers of sparks, the metal twisting as if an invisible force had crushed it like paper. And the pirates, stunned and terrified, fled without a fight, leaving Elias frozen in disbelief, his weapon lowered, his heart pounding with questions he did not know how to ask. Lyra trembled as though the act had drained her strength, and she whispered for the first time in his presence, her voice soft but clear, "I didn't mean to," before collapsing into his arms. And in that moment, Elias knew without doubt that she was not just a lonely orphan, not just another forgotten being, but something far greater and far more dangerous. And as he carried her back to the freighter, the weight of the secret pressed down on him like a storm waiting to break. For if she could do this as a child, what else might she be capable of? And what enemies might already be hunting for the girl whose powers could shatter weapons and bend the world around her? Elias kept the freighter hidden in the shadow of an asteroid belt after the pirate raid. But even in the safety of darkness, he could not shake the feeling that eyes were following them through the stars, for every console beep seemed sharper, every radio transmission carried a hint of menace. And though Lyra rested quietly in her cabin, he noticed how the ship itself seemed to hum when she dreamed, lights flickering faintly as though her thoughts brushed against the circuits. Then, 3 days later, while he traded at a remote supply port, Elias heard whispers from the merchants, hushed talk of officials moving from world to world, asking questions about a human freighter and a silver-eyed child, and his blood ran cold because he knew it was only a matter of time before those questions reached him. So he rushed back to the ship and found Lyra waiting at the ramp, her small hands clutching the blanket he had given her. And before he could speak, she said in a trembling voice that they are coming. And when he asked who she meant, she only looked at him with an expression too old for her years, her silence speaking more than words could. That night, as the freighter drifted far from the port, Elias pressed her gently for answers, and she revealed fragments of truth in broken whispers, confessing that she was the last of her kind, her people destroyed in a war no one remembered, because those who had won wanted it erased from history, and she had been hidden in the shelter not to protect her but to keep her forgotten, because those who feared her people's power would destroy her if they discovered she had survived. Elias listened in stunned silence, his hands tightening on the controls as the weight of her words sank in, and he realized the shelter had not been a place of safety at all, but a prison disguised as mercy. And now, by taking her away, he had placed himself directly between her and the shadows that hunted her. Yet even as dread gnawed at him, he felt no regret, only the firm resolve that he would not abandon her to the same fate that had taken her kin. Still, the danger was real, and when the freighter passed near a moonless system, Elias spotted two unmarked ships trailing at a distance, their lights dim, their movements precise like predators circling their prey, and though he cut power to hide in the void, he knew the hunt had already begun, and as Lyra stood silently beside him, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the darkness of the cockpit, he wondered if the enemies who had destroyed her people were now drawing closer, ready to finish what they had started, and if so, what choices he would have to make to protect the child, who carried not only the memory of a fallen race but a power that could shake the galaxy itself. The silence of deep space shattered when the unmarked ships finally closed in, their sleek black hulls cutting through the void like blades, and Elias felt his freighter shudder under the first wave of energy blasts that struck against its shields, the alarms screaming through the cockpit as warning lights flashed red across every console. Yet even in the chaos he kept his hands steady on the controls, weaving the old vessel between tumbling asteroids, knowing it was only a matter of time before his luck would run out. And beside him Lyra stood gripping the edge of the seat, her silver eyes wide with fear but also glowing faintly, as if some hidden fire within her was waking. He tried to reassure her, telling her that he had faced worse and that they would survive this too. But deep down he knew the freighter was no match for two warships designed to hunt and destroy. And when a blast tore through the starboard engine, sending sparks and smoke hissing into the cockpit, he realized their only hope was to make a stand. So he guided the ship toward a cluster of massive rocks where the asteroids were so dense that the hunters would have to follow closely, narrowing their advantage. And as the freighter scraped and rattled through narrow passages, Elias armed the few cannons he had, firing blindly to slow their pursuers. But the enemy ships pressed on with relentless precision, driving him deeper into the maze until finally a second blast ripped through the rear cargo bay, knocking him to the floor. Lyra rushed to his side, her small hands trembling as she tried to steady him. And when the hull groaned under the weight of another strike, she whispered that she could help, her voice low but steady, and though Elias wanted to tell her no, to protect her from what she feared within herself, he saw in her eyes that the moment had come when hiding was no longer possible. So he gave a single nod, his chest heavy with both fear and trust, and Lyra stepped to the center of the cockpit, her body trembling as she raised her hands, the faint glow in her eyes bursting into silver fire that illuminated the entire cabin. And suddenly the ship itself seemed to come alive, the flickering lights burning steady, the damaged panels humming with renewed strength, the engines roaring louder than they had in years. And outside the freighter a sphere of shimmering energy bloomed, wrapping the vessel in a shield that pulsed like a living star. The enemy ships opened fire, unleashing volleys of blazing energy, but their weapons cracked and dissolved against the glowing barrier as if striking solid stone. And for the first time since the chase began, Elias saw fear in the hunters' maneuvers, their sleek ships faltering as if unsure whether to advance or retreat. And then with a sudden burst of force that shook the void itself, Lyra spread her arms wider, and the shield erupted outward, a wave of silver light rippling through space, slamming into the enemy ships and hurling them back like toys in a storm, their hulls sparking and breaking apart as they spun helplessly into the darkness. When the light finally faded, silence returned, and the freighter drifted in the calm shadow of the asteroids, intact though battered, while Lyra collapsed against the chair, her glow dimming to a faint shimmer, her breathing heavy but her eyes still holding that strange mix of sorrow and determination. And Elias, staring at her in awe, realized that what he had just witnessed was not merely survival, but the awakening of a power that others had tried to erase from history, a power now bound to him through a choice he made in a forgotten shelter. And though he knew more enemies would come, stronger and greater than these, he also knew that the girl he had rescued was no longer helpless, and together they had just sent a message into the galaxy, a message that those who had destroyed her people would not ignore. The freighter limped through space after the battle, its hull scarred and its engines strained. Yet within the cockpit Elias sat in silence, staring at Lyra as she rested with her eyes half closed, her body weak from the power she had unleashed. And though he wanted to ask her what she had done, how she had summoned such strength, he held his tongue because the truth was already written in the fear. And all that filled him, this child was not simply the last of her kind. She was something the galaxy had chosen to forget, and by rescuing her he had pulled her secret back into the light. Still, even as dread coiled in his chest, a strange sense of pride grew alongside it, for he knew that she had not used her power to destroy but to protect, and that choice revealed more than her silence ever could. Yet peace did not last long, for within days of drifting toward the nearest colony, Elias noticed new signals appearing on the scanners. Fleets of ships moving in patterns, too deliberate to be traders or travelers, and whispers on the communications channels spoke of a human freighter seen fleeing an ambush, a freighter harboring a child with impossible abilities, and he realized that what had happened in the asteroid field had not gone unseen, that the wave of silver light had echoed across systems like a beacon calling both friend and foe. As they approached a small outpost to repair, Elias walked with Lyra through the dim corridors, and he felt the stares of strangers linger on them, some curious, some fearful, as if they sensed the hidden weight she carried. And in the market, a merchant leaned close to whisper that the old powers were stirring, that certain factions were hunting for the silver-eyed child, and that she was no longer safe anywhere. Elias felt the weight of every word, yet when he looked at Lyra, he saw not fear but a quiet strength, as though she had already accepted the danger that followed her, and he understood then that she was no longer the lonely figure in the shelter, but someone who had begun to find her place, even if that place was beside danger. One night as stars drifted past the viewport, she finally spoke with more than a whisper, telling him that she had seen visions in her dreams, flashes of cities burning, skies filled with ships, and voices calling her name not in hatred but in hope. And she asked him if he believed she could be more than just a survivor, if she could be a symbol for others who lived in fear of being forgotten. And Elias, though shaken by her words, placed a hand on her shoulder and told her that sometimes the smallest voice could change the loudest storm, and that she had already changed his life more than she would ever know. But even as those words left his mouth, alarms broke out across the ship again, the scanners lighting up with the approach of another fleet, larger than before, their formation too precise to be anything but organized hunters. And as Elias braced himself at the controls, Lyra stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever. And in that moment he knew the galaxy would soon learn that the girl who had once been abandoned in silence was no longer hidden, that she was rising into the center of a storm that would test not only her power, but the courage of humanity itself. And though fear pressed at the edges of his thoughts, Elias felt an unshakable truth settle in his chest, that no matter what forces came against them, neither of them would face it alone. And together they were about to step into a future that would shock the galaxy far more than anyone could imagine.